Welcome to the OnScript podcast, your home for world-class conversations on scripture and theology, where you get to meet some of the best in the field. Visit us at onscript.study. Say hello on Twitter at OnScriptPodcast and stop by our Facebook page at facebook.com/OnScript.
Hey everyone, welcome back to OnScript. This is Matt Lynch coming to you from Regent College in Vancouver. Thanks to those of you who support us by listening or sharing the word, by recommending us and so on. As we move into summer, as we're in summer now, I encourage you to share the word about the podcast as you're gathered outside. There's nothing better than going to the beach, having your speaker connected to your phone and just blaring OnScript episodes to people who are around you, because it's probably one of the best ways to get the word out to a highly concentrated group of people. So if anyone's going to be on the beach this summer, especially in densely populated areas, please do consider sharing the word that way. It's a great way you can help us out, because we've helped you out by providing these episodes. And so share the word by playing it loud and proud to those of you, to those around you at the beach, maybe at the lake for those of you who are more inland, or if you're at a mountain resort, that can be a place to do it. Just think in terms of densely populated areas like restaurants and so on. So we appreciate that. Enjoy the episode. Hey everyone, welcome back. I have as our guest today, Dr. Madison Lyonhart, who is Associate Professor of Religion and Philosophy at the University of Jamestown. He is also a fellow at the Cambridge Center for the Study of Platonism at Cambridge University, and he's a co-host of the Spiritually Incorrect podcast. Also, he co-founded the NumiNous Institute, like NumiNous, but Nous, Institute for Faith and Neurodiversity with his wife, Madison, who is a doctoral candidate in history at Oxford University. He's the author of several books, and I want to read some of these titles to you so you get a sense of the person. And the names of the books include The Journey of God, Christianity in Six Movements, published by IVP Academic. He has a co-edited volume with John Milbank that's more of a kind of it'll sound more like mainstream theological here, New Trinitarian Ontologies. But then we can move back to the fun titles: Space God, Rejudging, a debate between Moore, Newton, and Einstein. And then he's also his MonoThreeism, an absurdly arrogant attempt to answer all the problems of the last 2,000 years in one night at a pub. And then finally, the book we're discussing today, Zeus Was An Atheist, an odd retelling of the Moses story. So, Jonathan, I really like these titles and the range of topics that you cover as you write. And so I was wondering, as I looked over these titles and have heard you on your podcast as well, what you consider like the center of gravity in what you write and research and teach on. Like, what do you keep coming back to? Maybe it's a question or a set of questions. Maybe you have multiple centers of gravity. I don't know.
Yeah. That's a great question. I think usually if I were to forced to describe myself, I'd probably say I'm an interdisciplinary philosopher theologian, or philosophical theologian, or philosopher of religion. And I think the interdisciplinarity there is key because my attention span isn't great. So I tend to get really excited about something for 6 months or a year. I go and just go wild on that for a while and then something else. Right. So for my dissertation, it was physics, how does Einstein and the relativization of space-time impact omnipresence? You know what I mean? So that was one. And then it just kind of changes all the time. I think the probably the core piece that's thread through everything is probably the Trinity and ontology. And so that might be where the Trinitarian ontology bit is, because I feel like that is at the heart of reality, right? The three in one, the one in many, unified in diversity. I feel like all the different conversations come back to that. And it's precisely because they weave unity in the midst of diversity that we can then, that I, as an interdisciplinary, person, can then go and say, how do I find the unity in all of these different disciplines, right? Like, I do a lot with film studies. I teach a class on God and the Holocaust, and then it's kind of, I'm all over the place. But I do think there is a common thread there, of the God who is overall, right? Who is at the heart of all of these different things, whether it's biblical studies or it's cultural studies, right? Like he is, so he is the God of all that is. I think that's probably the driving heart behind what I do.
Yeah. And so, and you mentioned you have trouble paying attention to one thing, but then you go really deep for 6 months. Could you talk about that dynamic of like being all over the place, but also like laser focus for a time? What's going on there?
Yeah. So part of that has to do with my neurodiversity. And so one of the things, you brought up the NumiNous Institute for Faith and Neurodiversity. I'm not the person who's going to read ancient manuscripts for 10 years to do that. But I am someone who will hyper focus on whatever I'm interested in the moment. And that hyper focus means I can kind of go super in depth on something. That term hyper focus is a common one for people with ADHD. Is where like I could sit and read and write something for like 48 hours without stopping if I needed to. I don't, because I have a family and I've had to really be regulated and like schedule myself. But like, if I'm interested in something, I won't stop. If I'm not interested in it, I can't do anything. I'm not a disciplined person in that sense. I've never been able to force myself to do stuff that I don't care about. And so, yeah, I think that's been a huge part of the dynamic. And then in terms of, diving deep into something for 6 months, there's this dance between, and I think this is the plight of anyone who's trying to enter different disciplines and do that interdisciplinary stuff. I think there's this sense where you want to build bridges and make connections, but you also don't want to too quickly assume you've understood this other terrain that you're trying to map. And that's a real tension, is if you want to do interdisciplinary work, you have to be broad enough to actually span all of these conversations, but also deep enough that it's not all just nothing or just you projecting your own discipline onto everyone else's discipline. And that's a tension I've struggled with. And I think anyone who does that kind of stuff struggles with that tension. It helps that my co-host and brother-in-law, Seth Hart, he's more of the traditional academic, detail-minded scholar. And so I just sort of boldly venture into all these different areas, and he helps keep me tethered to actual like reality. And I think that's been a really good dance and dialectic for us, is I kind of wildly, I'm like, well, what if we go have this conversation about like a Hindu view of science and put that in conversation with this film over here? And then he's like, okay, but you're assuming this, thing that Aquinas would say. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll talk about what Aquinas says. All right, there we go. Thank you for tethering me to something. So that's kind of the dance for me.
So he tethers you, but you also kind of push him into new areas and help him think big picture and not hyper specialize, would you say, or what? Yeah.
That was a beautiful way to summarize in one very clear, succinct sentence what I just rambled about for like, yeah, I think I would say that. He would then say that he's creative and bold too. And I would say, of course you are, buddy. And I'd pat him gently on the shoulder.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I was just reading, do you know Jonathan Pennington's book, Jesus the Great Philosopher? I don't know if you've seen that.
That sounds familiar. What is that?
Well, he's talking about Jesus as a philosopher, like among the philosophical schools in the first century. And he was talking about how he reads a quote. I can't remember who it's from, but this person was saying that there are many scholars of philosophies of philosophy, but very few philosophers now. And that is because to be a philosopher was to cast a sort of totalizing vision for the good life that includes metaphysics, ethics, politics, and epistemology. And very few people are willing to go there because of hyper specialization. And so to cast a vision broad enough like that requires a kind of audacity, but also that's what a philosopher was in the first centuries. Like they brought all that together around the question of the good life. And so, it seems like your kind of movement all in different directions also kind of allows people to catch a glimpse, of a philosopher in action. So I think that's important too. I always like to read in endorsements, and this book is that you've written, Zeus Was An Atheist, an odd retelling of the Moses story, published by Cascade, is for Grandma Frances. So tell me about her.
Yeah. So my parents are older. They had me in their mid-40s, so I didn't really know 3 of my 4 grandparents. There was only one who I have memories really of, and she moved to Vancouver after her husband, my grandfather, died. And so she was living in the Arbutus Manor near where Prince of Wales Secondary School is, near the Arbutus Club. If you take the 16 Arbutus bus, is it still the 16 Arbutus bus?
Yeah.
Okay. It goes right there. And so she was the only one I actually grew up with and knew. And I have a very distinct memory of watching The Prince of Egypt with her, just her and I. Everyone else in the family, I don't know where they were that night, but they all went out without us. And I was too young to go, and she was too old to go. Because she was late 80s. She was 95 when she died. And so we watched that movie and we talked about it. And I was probably 8 or 9 at that time. And she always used to sing, and I would sing back to her. She would sing the song, "Go Tell It on the Mountain," which at the time I didn't realize was her subtly indoctrinating me, but I guess it worked. And I would sing back. And so she was just a very sweet, kind woman. And I don't know for sure, but I think her prayers for our family have been subtly guiding a lot of what's happened. And she died when I was in my senior year, and I was 17. And I think that death actually is part of what led me to be like, okay, I want to be a Christian and I want to go do ministry. Because a few months later, I was supposed to go to UBC. I was going to go to Corpus Christi College and then transfer into UBC because I wasn't good enough to just get into UBC. But I switched right after she died. A few months later, I switched and I went to a Bible college. And so her death was really, I think, instrumental part of that. Something that my mom said is that when she died, my grandma looked so peaceful because she knew where she was going. And she knew that her shepherd was there to greet her on the other side. And so that's been very formative for me. And it's also been very formative for my mom as well. So,
that's really beautiful.
Yeah. That's why the book's dedicated to her.
Yeah. And it's a book about Moses, even though the title is Zeus Was An Atheist. So maybe help our readers get a sense of this book you've written. It's category defying. So what is it? What have you done?
What have you wrought? So I just love the Moses story. And that was the connection to my grandma as we watched The Prince of Egypt together. And that was a defining work for me. So I loved the Moses story, and it started off at when I was a ministry. I used to be I was an English minister at a Chinese church, Vancouver Christian Logos Church. And I would dress up as Moses because I didn't stick out enough, I guess, as the only white person there. And I would, take a big staff and I would do sermons as Moses. And then when I became a professor, I translated those into lectures, and I just really enjoyed the story and allowing the story and the character to just sort of take a wild life of his own and to ask deep questions. And so I was like, maybe I'll write this down. And I started writing it down, and that's kind of how it was birthed. And I don't want to say it's biblical in the sense that I'm telling the biblical story, but I think it's also very philosophical. I'm projecting a lot of philosophy onto Moses in a way that I don't think he would have talked or thought, but in a way that I think does help make sense of the things he believed. And so there's a lot of philosophy in the book, and the real contrast in the title between Zeus and the God of Moses is this I am claim. What is your name? Moses says, and God says, I am. And trying to unpack that. And I think there's a lot of different ways to unpack that. I think part of that is God's presence in history. I'm actually here. I'm close. And I think that is true. But I also believe that there's something about God where being, existence itself, he is not just another creature that was made. No, he is existence itself, the one from whom all of existence flows. He's not another being in creation. He's being itself. And I think when you contrast that to a lot of other mythological gods like Zeus, you begin to see the key difference here. I mean, there's that famous Richard Dawkins quote about, I think it's Richard Dawkins. You're an atheist about all these other gods like Zeus and Ra. Some of us just go one god further. And as if these gods are on the same plane as what we're talking about. And I think the thing with Zeus is, and I get into this in the book, is Zeus is not the creator, even in Greek mythology's own story. Zeus is born. Zeus has a dad. Zeus's siblings get eaten by his dad, and Zeus has to come rescue them. So even in Greek mythology, or at least earlier Greek mythology, Zeus is not being itself. He's not the eternal transcendent ground of all things. He's a creature. A creature who might be a super creature, but he's still a creature. He's created. He begins to exist. He doesn't ground the qualities of reality. He's not beauty, truth, goodness, and love itself. He's just a creature like us. He began to exist.
Yeah, just a really powerful one.
Yeah, he's us, but just a bit bigger, right? He's like Iron Man. He's a super creature, but still a creature nonetheless. In contrast, the God that Moses is talking about is actually the creator of the universe, the creator of time and space, the one who is being itself. And as I get into in the rest of the book, I also think the one who grounds all of the qualities of existence, a God who doesn't just so happen to be beautiful, but is beauty itself, a God who doesn't just choose one day to be good and be mean the next. No, he is goodness itself. And I think when you stop thinking about God as Zeus, as just a human, a bit larger, and start thinking about God not as another creature, but as the creator, as I am, it radically changes the question, and theology just becomes so much more interesting and relevant to everything.
I think, when I heard your conversation about one aspect of this book on your podcast, and I heard you were interested in the burning bush episode, I think that really caught my attention, because it is this just magnetic story that is, I think, in part, like, it does what the bush does. The story itself does what the bush does, which is it attracts, perplexes, draws in, confuses, unlocks things. All of that. The bush itself is it's not just a metaphor. It's like the story does the thing that Moses experiences. So we get to kind of like go through that as readers. But you've written in this book, you have these different philosophical reflections of the Moses character in the story, but set in this fictional account of Moses going through life in the wilderness and so on. So what? So I'm guessing, like, based on the fact that you acted in character when you preached and then wove that into your lectures, is this kind of like, did you lecture in the character of Moses?
Oh, yeah.
To teach philosophy?
Yeah. So I'm at
with a staff.
I'm at the
like,
front.
I want to imagine you as a teacher.
I'm at the front of my classroom at least 3 or 4 times a semester, fully robed with a giant staff that I got from the woods outside next door. And I'm also a very large person. So if this helps create that, like, I'm like 6'3", I'm like a very large person. And so I'm like stomping around the class with a giant stick, stomping it on the ground. That was part of the joy of it, was just, it felt, I liked writing it, but I also just loved improving and being Moses and being up there. And it was just a lot of fun. And it was probably, I think in the classroom, I think students are always like, oh God, what is he going to do now? Which I hope is a good thing. I'm sure some students don't resonate with that, but I think that was part of what was really just joyful. And because I love the Moses narrative so much, it was just fun. This was probably the easiest book I've ever written. Like, it just flowed. It was like I was in an improv class and I was just having a blast. And I think maybe that started because it wasn't just me alone in my thoughts. It was me having fun with my class. And maybe that's where the joy comes from.
So, based on rapport and response, what works and lands. And so you're not sort of just imagining this hypothetical audience and saying, what might they like to hear or whatever. But yeah, and that comes out in the book.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. It's me with the big staff going, are you not entertained?
It's I had mentioned this book by Jonathan Pennington, another Jonathan, and he references, I can't remember if you reference it in the book, the Dura Europos painting, and it's this, like, let me see if I can actually read to you from this section. I'm just like trying to find this. So this is I think it's a 3rd century. Oh, maybe it's 1st century. I'd have to look it up. No. I think it's a 3rd century painting. Anyway, it's a synagogue painting, and it has Moses dressed as a philosopher at the burning bush.
Does it?
Yeah. and so, like, this idea of Moses as a philosopher, while in the sort of Greek mold, obviously wasn't the case for ancient Israelites. In the 3rd century, at least, this idea goes back very far, of having him in that kind of character. So, let's talk about one other thing I noticed in the book, and this is just like it caught my attention because you mentioned that you drew throughout this book from Elie Wiesel's book, Messengers of God. And that's a collection of, for readers who aren't familiar, it's biblical stories, but they're Jewish midrash where they creatively retell them, fill in gaps, and often, like, midrash will sort of take a gap in the text, something that's unexplained, as an opening to fill it in and explain it. So, in what ways is your book, or the way you think, modeled on that, like, Jewish midrash? Is that come into the picture? Or I don't know if you have like reflections on Messengers of God, because I just thought that was such a interesting note.
No, I think midrash is a great. I think actually, Jenny Matheny actually said midrash in her review of the book.
Okay.
Which I hadn't actually quite pinned it down, but I think the Wiesel influence is there. So I think it was unwittingly midrashic without me even thinking about it. And he's a strong influence for me. Like I said, I teach that class on the Holocaust, and his theology of protest, this idea that, after this has happened, I can't just quietly accept that God's there, but I can't let him go either. And so I just stand here staring up at the sky, angry. I don't think that's where we should end up theologically. I don't think that's an end point, but as a step on the journey, there is biblical precedent for that all over the place. I think, with Job, Lamentations, the Psalms, like, we're angry at God a lot. And I feel like, even if, like, we don't have a right to be, I think the fact that we're still talking to God and keeping the conversation open, that intimacy is good. And so like, Wiesel survives the Holocaust, loses his whole family, and he first writes his book, and it's basically like God doesn't exist, right? Like the Nazis killed my God. But then in 1997, he writes a Times article when he says, God, it is time for us to make up. It's been far too long. And he's really influenced me. And I think he came into play with the ending of the book a little bit, because the ending of the book deals with divine justice. It enters into the question of the firstborn son. How does God's justice relate to his love? And I felt the book ended a bit on I don't have a clean resolution for this. And I think Moses at the end of his life in the book is still thinking about the firstborn son because he's still uncomfortable with it. He's still uncomfortable. And I know there's different ways to think about what the firstborn son was. But I wanted to imagine him kind of like Wiesel, like, God, I don't know what to do with this. I have served you my whole life, but I am still very uncomfortable with some of the things that I do not understand. And I kind of wanted to end the book with a little flavor of that, where God is still there and we're still talking to him, but it's not like we have easy answers, which reminds me a lot of your book that you did on the Old Testament, right? Like, we're still faithful, but we don't have to pretend that any of these options for Old Testament violence are easily settled, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, exactly.
It's okay to live in that tension. But as for the Midrash, which I think was actually your question, yeah, I'm not trying to do like biblical exegesis. I'm trying, and I think I on the one hand, that makes it less historically accurate, but on the other hand, the book wasn't written for exegetes.
Yeah.
Like God, the stories were meant to be told, inhabited, mythologized, entered into your mind, right? Like people encountered it as a story before they dissected it into little parts. And you know what I mean? So I think in that way, to some extent, the sort of more midrashic, like where I'm kind of exploring the text in ways that I'm not sure is 100% true exegetically to exactly what the text meant. In a weird way, I think that actually gets us back to how scripture would have actually been encountered originally. So I think there's a tension there that I find interesting and exciting.
Yeah, the story is meant to be something to think with and not just about. And so you're thinking with that story about all these really big questions. So let me go to, there's so many things like that I want to follow up on in that. But let's keep moving. You said in speaking about God as being itself, and the ground of being, you make a point about creation, that the biblical story of creation does not say that in the beginning was material chaos or dust swirling in the abyss. So some people might wonder about that and think about, okay, in contrast to the Greek mythologies where, gods sort of come out of chaos, or in Egypt, that's certainly the case where the gods emerge and self-generate and out of chaos. But Genesis 1-2 has us, some people read it as chaos. I actually don't, but what would you say about like the watery beginning there? Does that suggest that there is a kind of material beginning to the cosmos in the biblical account?
So I wouldn't feel the need to take a position on exactly whether chaos was already there or whether matter was pre-existent and then given form, or like, I know John Walton has a lot on this, right? I wouldn't want to take a position on exactly what needs to be there. What I would want to say is even if Genesis isn't the beginning of matter itself, even if Genesis is the giving to form of pre-existent matter, I would want to say that matter and chaos is not more ontologically fundamental than mind and reason. And so you could even have an account where reason and mind and divine God coexist eternally with matter. That's not the position I would take, but at no point is matter or chaos more fundamental than mind, structure, reason. And I think as long as we keep that, we have a worldview that's genuinely not atheistic. Whereas I would say Greek mythology, no, it's a wide category, a wide net to say Greek mythology. But earlier Greek mythology, especially before Zeus becomes more of like the principle of existence, which later which later thinkers do that with Zeus. But earlier on, that Greek universe kind of has not mind, reason, structure, goodness at the heart of all things. It has chaos and matter without form. And I think that's genuinely atheistic, even if within that universe, these super creatures do arise who, to our perspective, might seem like gods in the same way that we might seem like gods to an ant, right? So I think that would be my main thing. I don't need to say what Genesis 1 is saying, but I would definitely say what it isn't saying.
Yeah. And when you say that reason and mind are more fundamental, could you say how you arrive at that point?
Yeah. So I think all of existence is sort of permeated with a rational structure, a unity underlying the diversity, differences, and chaos of existence. And I think that's, to some degree, what logos means. I mean, John is using that word in a culture that would have some references there. And I don't like to impose, Hellenistic philosophy onto ancient Hebrew texts, but I do want to recognize the places where those come together in Scripture itself. I think John 1, I think Hebrews, it's hard to not see some sort of something reminiscent of Platonic stuff there. I don't want to overdo that, but I want to admit those things. And I see Christ as the Logos who structures all of reality in that way. But as for that Logos being more fundamental than matter, one of the questions I ask in the book is, before the material universe existed, could it already exist? Which sounds like a really complicated question, right? But before the material universe existed, could it already exist? And immediately you go, what? No, that's stupid. How could it exist before it exists, right? And what we're actually doing there is saying that's illogical. So logic exists even when matter doesn't, is what we've assumed. Is if you actually think that matter can't exist and not exist at the same time, you're actually privileging logic as existing even when no material things do, which points to the fact that your ontology is making logic more basic than matter, which, whether you want to make that chronological and say that that reason was here before matter, or if you want to just say it's not chronological, it's just ontological and reason is more basic than matter, either way, mind becomes more absolute than matter in that assumption. Now, you could reject that and say maybe matter existed before it existed. But even doing that enters a realm of transcendence and mystery that I think is borderline religious. So I think most of us, even people who don't realize what they're doing, I think most of us privilege mind, reason, and logic as more basic than matter. And I think scientists assume that when they assume they can logically study the structure of the universe. Without logic and reason permeating reality, there is no science. There's chaos that can't be charted.
Right. Yeah. It's so when you speak in terms of like a logical rationale for understanding the primacy of logic, like you're giving a sort of, you're developing an argument for it. How does that land with, I don't know if you have tested this, but like for people who have a more like Eastern cosmology, let's say, because I know I remember talking to someone who was either came out of a Buddhist background or was familiar with it, but talked about like views of the cosmos as eternal, the world just sort of continuously like eternally existing, and that like the notion of the question, for instance, that you sometimes get, like, well, where does matter come from? It has to come from somewhere, and that gave it its existence. Well, they would push back and say, well, it eternally existed. So how would you engage with that kind of view?
Yeah, I think in some ways, I don't think it's the Christian view, but I think it can be made consistent on a broader level with the Christian view in one of the ways I just stated, which was mind and the divine mind. God does not have to be chronologically prior to creation. in order to be ontologically deeper and more basic to reality than creation, right? Such that even if matter is eternal, you still need some sort of necessary thing that underlies it. Because I think what we can say about matter is, even if you imagine the chain of material causation going back infinitely, right? Like, let's imagine it never began to exist. Even so, infinity is composed of finite parts. How the infinite and finite relate is confusing, but those parts are not necessary. They're not ontologically necessary. They're contingent. And so I think even if chronologically you don't have to explain how this moment exists because it was caused by the previous one in the chain, ontologically you still have to explain it. What makes the whole thing ontologically necessary? What does it rest upon if all of matter is finite and contingent? What isn't finite and contingent? So even if you assume an infinite material universe, you might have a chronological explanation for how we got to this moment, but you don't have an ontological one. And I think that's a key difference. But I do think the more that globalization is happening and the more that these different movements and religions are talking to each other, I think the next 100, 200 years are going to be sort of a Protestant Reformation moment where something fundamental and radical is going to happen to find a way for us to talk to each other. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I want to stay rooted in Christ as I do it, but I'm open to more broader conversations than I think most Christian theologians are having right now. So I would be excited to see where that goes.
Give me an example of a kind of conversation that you envision there. I don't know if you can prognosticate.
No, I mean, I'm not trying to go into heresy here.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just curious about like the conversation that you just envisioned about the material universe, where you didn't just sort of dismiss it out of hand about an eternally existing material world. What other kinds of conversations would you imagine?
Yeah, so I'm kind of at the point where I think, so I'm going to say some things that might upset some people, but then I'll try to walk it back a bit. I think Hinduism, I think the Upanishads, I think like a lot of what's being said in these texts, and Taoism as well, about the absolute, the transcendent, the one underlying all things, I think that's true. I think all of that's, I think they're totally pointing to God. It's just that as a Trinitarian, I also think that amidst the oneness, there is manyness. And so even if we're all pointing to a oneness, I think Christians are pointing to a threeness, to a sense that not all of the differences and distinctions in reality are diluted down to a more fundamental oneness. But actually in the way that Jesus is distinct from the Father, while still united to him, at the heart of all of existence, there's oneness and manyness, such that the natural world is not just an illusion, which I think, I'm not saying all Eastern philosophy gets there, and Eastern's a broad category, but a lot of it does. A lot of it does dissolve the physical universe, the incarnational, the distinctions between things, and the distinctions between persons. If you look at how the New Age movement sort of appropriated some Eastern stuff, it's always about the difference between you and me is an illusion of the physical body. Because, you might be large and a man, and I'm small and a woman, but the body is an illusion. And when you get past those illusions, we're all one, right? To some extent, I think that's true in the sense that we're all united. There's an underlying connectedness or oneness to reality. And yet the Christian still insists the manyness is not an illusion. It's grounded in the ontology, the Trinitarian ontology of reality itself, such that the one and three are both equally real. And the underlying unity of the oneness doesn't negate the threeness, but nor does the threeness negate that there's an underlying unity and oneness to reality. And so for me, that's why I think Trinitarian ontology is going to be so foundational to these conversations in the coming centuries, in a way that says, hey, all the other religions aren't saying complete nonsense. Like, they're saying something really true here, but it's not. But at the same time, I think the Trinity has space for those truths to be united with itself while still saying we're saying something distinct. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to have these conversations at a level that actually takes seriously that God made all these people in his image as well, and that he works through their worldviews and religions as well, even if I still recognize that I think Jesus is at the heart of all things.
And from so as an Old Testament scholar, that kind of international embrace of wisdom from other traditions is built into Scripture itself. Particularly in the wisdom text, there's a section of Proverbs 22 to 24 that's more or less borrowed from an Egyptian wisdom text and just repurposed in the Bible. So there's a recognition of wisdom from other traditions in Scripture. So there's a good precedent there. And obviously you're engaging in those conversations. One thing you mentioned there, because I assume that's stuff you discuss in MonoThreeism, which is not the book we're discussing today. But I just had a question on that. In the spirit of jumping around, you talk about reality almost like a homology or mirror, like a sort of correspondence with the Trinity. And for some Christians, they emphasize the creator-creature distinction. What's the link between God and the material world? Why would they exhibit similar qualities, if I could put it that way?
Yeah. So this really does come down to Trinitarian ontology, because if you think at the heart of all existence is oneness, then the distinctions between all things, including the creator and creature, break down. But if you think at the heart of all things is an ontology of difference, manyness, and otherness, then there is no underlying unity or connections. I mean, I think that's to some extent where postmodernity, that stereotype at least of postmodernity, gets you, is there is no meta-narrative, there's no underlying unifying vision of reality, there's just utter difference that can't be crossed, right? But what I think the interesting thing about the Trinity is it says, well, actually, oneness and manyness. There's a unity amidst the diversity, and neither one of those swallow up the other, right? Like often people say unity and diversity, but what they actually mean is a homogenizing oneness that swallows up all the difference, right? But I think as a Christian and a Trinitarian, I'm trying to say, no, I'm not saying a threeness that later squiggles back into a more fundamental oneness. I'm saying both, 1 and 3. God is God, and he's also Father, Son, and Spirit. And people are like, well, how does that make sense? Let's make the modes of this because we want to make the oneness somehow more fundamental, right? Again, but if you instead just swallow the pill that oneness and manyness are both equally fundamental at an ontological level, then you can say that there is unity between creator and creature without dissolving into complete oneness. You can have unity amidst diversity. The creature can be genuinely distinct, qualitatively distinct from the creator, and yet there still be a deeper unity there, because unity doesn't mean the opposite of diversity or difference. There's a Trinitarian ontology that holds those things together. And so I'm glad you went to the creator-creature thing, because I'll say a lot of things that seem like I'm breaking that distinction down when I'm talking about oneness and unity, but then I also say a lot of things that keep them apart when I'm talking about difference, otherness, and diversity. And for me, I can say both of those things because I'm a Trinitarian. And I don't want to say no other worldview approaches that. In Hinduism, they have qualified non-dualism. They're trying to say similar things at times. Some groups are. I just feel like the Trinity does it. I want to say does it best, or does it most consistently, and makes it the most emphasized. Like other groups might gesture in this direction, but they haven't made it the center of their whole religion. The Trinity is not a side belief for us. It's the heart of the thing. We've made the paradox of reality our God. You know what I mean? Like the unity and diversity is not a side thing just for philosophers. We teach 1 and 3 in Sunday school.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
Which is pretty wild. So we're going to switch gears and do a speed round for everyone whose brains are fried right now.
Sorry.
No, it's great. I love it. So what's one idea? I mean, this might still be on that wavelength, but what's one idea in theology or philosophy that you think needs to die?
So with Calvinism, it's not that I want Calvinism to die, because I actually think most of what they're saying is true. It's just, I think it's paradoxically wedded with Arminianism, right? Like, I think those distinctions break down once you have a Trinitarian ontology that can say this is true, but also this other thing is true at a deeper unity, right? So, and I would say that I would say that across the board. I think things like this debate between classical theism and a more relational God who can enter history and feel emotions, I think those things just break down. And I think we feel the need to uphold them precisely because we think philosophy and reason requires us to. But like, I think philosophy constantly points to its limits. And I think the most rational person is the person who precisely in a Trinitarian way can say, yes, logos is everything. And yet the Son is also not identical with the Father.
All right.
So
we're gonna keep going.
You were like speed round, and I took it back to the complexity. I'm sorry. I should have. Okay, the answer is Calvinism. Just Calvinism.
It's good because it highlights something I want to come back to, which is the place of paradoxing your thinking. So what's the most significant book in theology and philosophy in the last 50 years? Like, you could pick one or the intersection of those two disciplines.
I have absolutely no idea. I really don't.
Okay.
I could say that for me, the most significant book is the Silmarillion.
Well, there you go. Let's go with that. All right. Would you rather teach for an entire year wearing a suit lined with fiberglass insulation, or end each sentence while you teach for an entire semester with, I guess?
I'm ending the sentence with, I guess. That sounds like a lot of fun. That sounds like I'm going to come up with some German sentences that never end. That's like 10 pages long. And then at the very end, I take a breath and go, I guess. That sounds like a blast.
You found a way to sort of cheat your way out of it, right? Make long sentences. Hadn't thought of that. All right. Would you rather have an intro to philosophy class of 50 football players? No shame there, 50 football players, or 50 committed flat earthers?
I'm going to go with the footballers.
With footballers? Okay.
Yeah. Do you want an
All
explanation, right, or this is speed round?
Yeah. I am curious. So let's hear it.
In some ways, it's the difference between ignorance and actual mistake.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certainty to the flat earthers that I would love to have a conversation with a flat earther. I find it fascinating. And I think it's a prime example of, there's a lot of very intelligent flat earthers. I think it's very interesting to see how anyone can be convinced of anything. But at the same time, the certainty I would find that frustrating. And I teach at a sports school right now. Like, we're University of Jamestown's a sports school, and they might not, have all of the sophistication of an academia first school, but like, there's a humility there. And a lot of these people are very smart people, even if they're not the traditional academic type, right? So it's, and to see the eyes open and get excited for someone who didn't think they could wrestle with deep ideas because, I'm just a jock, right? They're stuck in those stereotypes. But for them to be like, oh, that blew my mind. Oh, this might actually relate to me. This might broaden my world beyond sports, but it might also have something to say to my life of sports, right? Like, one of the things I do, I'm making this a long answer again, aren't I? I'm not obeying your speed rules, but one of the things I do ask is, I ask my students, is pastoring more holy or sacred of a profession than being an athlete? And I don't think they are, personally. I really don't. I just don't think an incarnational view of the body and of life, but at the same time, I wouldn't go to the other extreme and be like, muscular Christianity, absolutize the body, but so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, as a dad of a very, very committed wrestler, who also has philosophical and theological and historical interests, I hope, I know there are people who are interested in both or could be awakened to both. Okay, so would you rather go on a 2-hour barefoot walk through rattlesnake country or eat a primarily insect-based diet for a week?
Both of those sound very... If I could get away for a week and get some a break from work and responsibilities, I'd go live with some rattlesnakes, but I'd eat the insects.
Yeah. Have you ever had any of that food? Like, because sometimes there's like cricket based,
I
like,
think I've had some sort of cricket at some point.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think I was in. Yeah, I have.
Okay. Do you have a favorite novel?
Oh, well, this is just going to betray me again. It's probably The Lord of the Rings.
Right. You just said Silmarillion earlier, so okay, I could imagine why. And for those listening, Jonathan has a chessboard, Lord of the Rings, right behind him. I was going to ask like your favorite board game, but maybe it's chess. Is that the case?
No, well, either chess or Risk. I still have a bi-weekly game of Risk that I play with my youth group from high school. So we play cool. Once in a while. Online we play because they live elsewhere.
Yeah, I actually have Lord of the Rings Risk. Do you have that?
I do too.
Yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah, you move the ring along, and it's very.
Do you
cool.
play it regularly? I've always tried to find people to play it, and nobody will.
Well, maybe you go to SBL, so maybe we could play it there.
Let's do it.
I don't play regularly, but I play periodically. Do you have a favorite joke?
I don't think I do.
Okay. All right. So knock knock.
Who's there?
Owls.
Owls who?
Right. You're correct. Knock knock.
That was a hoot. Who's there?
Cows.
Cows who?
No. Cows moo. Owls who? All right. So as a youth, what was the best prank that you did? Do you have like pranks that you used to play?
As a youth, I remember in high school we ordered pizza to the math class, which it's been done in film, but we actually did it. So
tell me about it.
I liked that. We ordered pizza to the math room window, but the guy didn't know where the math class was, so we sent. This was grade 9, right? We sent one of my friends, Andrew, to go to the road to go meet him. And then we're watching from the math class window. He gets in this guy's car and they drive away. And we're like, oh God, no, what's going on? And he doesn't come back for like 10 minutes. And then suddenly we hear a knock at the window and the guy's there with the pizza. I think he had to talk him into doing it for the prank, but like we were freaking out for a while. I did a prank this week that ended badly, but I'll be quiet.
Wait, we got to hear that. Okay,
so I'm going to preface this. Okay, well, this ends with a concussion for someone. So this week, my kids and wife were in one room, and my kids they're autistic and they just love drama and create, and so they were in the other room, and I just had the idea suddenly, okay, I took off my shirt, I covered my whole body in ketchup, and then I laid on the ground with a Minecraft sword sticking out of me, and I started screaming. And at first I was screaming like, I've been help. But then I'm like, okay, they're going to come in and see me covered in red, and there's going to be a second before they realize it's ketchup. So I immediately changed my tone to, I've been killed by a Minecraft man, to make it clear I was joking, right? And then they come in and I'm lying in the ketchup, and they all laugh. And my wife wasn't even mad about it, which was wonderful. I wasn't sure how she would feel, but she was on board with it. She laughed. We were all laughing. It was good. Then I go to the bathroom to shower, and I'm going to come back and clean it up, but I go to shower. And then I hear a scream, and then me and the boys run in, and my wife's lying in the ketchup, acting injured. And the boys are like, Mama, stop it. Dada just did this joke. And I'm like, boys, I think she might be serious. And they're like, no, we saw her. She laid down in it. And I was like, oh, okay, she's joking. So I poke her with the Minecraft stick, which has ketchup on it. And I'm like, if you're really hurt, you won't mind if I put ketchup on you. And she's like, Jonathan. And then I'm like, oh, okay. The tone she used there, I was like, okay, she's actually hurt. So she had a concussion.
Oh no.
She's doing okay now. She's fine. We've been to we checked it out. But the key thing there is she didn't slip in the ketchup. She slipped next to the ketchup into the ketchup. And I say that because it makes me somehow feel less guilty.
Right.
But it was funny that back to back, the same prank seemed to be happening twice. Like the kids are like, wait, Dada just did this joke. And then there's Mama lying in the ketchup again. Like, Mama, no. So this actually doesn't sound like a very funny prank. But she's okay. She's actually sitting right there reading. She's okay.
Okay. I'm glad she's okay. And does this put an end to her like UFC career, or like after you get a concussion, sometimes this ends things like boxing. I don't know what she. Yeah.
I think it puts an end to the vocational professional side of things, but I think she's always going to be feisty. She's always going to be wrestling, fighting, attacking. That's who she is, and I love that about her.
And do you live in Jamestown?
Yeah.
Okay, could you finish this sentence? By the way, we're talking Jamestown, North Dakota, right?
Yes, North Dakota.
Okay, yeah. So could you complete this sentence for me? Jamestown, North Dakota is home to the world's largest
buffalo.
Yes. So tell me about the buffalo.
Yeah, so we have the world's largest buffalo. I don't know exactly how tall it is, but it's like maybe a few stories tall, and it's near the highway. So as you're driving, there's just nothing, right? You're in North Dakota. There's nothing out here, and you're just driving, and suddenly upon the hills, you see rising a giant buffalo towards you, and you can see it from all over town, and it's on a hill. So it doesn't look like a statue. It's the right colors. Sometimes you're just driving around and it feels like there's a giant buffalo in the sky. So
yeah, and just to be clear for our listeners, we're not talking about an actual animal here. Like it's modeled on one.
Oh yeah,
it's not alive.
I mean, I've never caught it moving, but yes,
yeah.
It dominates the horizon. They built it like 60 years ago or something. So yeah.
The nickname of Jamestown, looked up online, is the pride of the prairie, and maybe because of that, buffalo. And a last speed round question: are there sacred spaces? Are there sacred places?
I would say yes. I think everything is sacred in the sense that God made it all and called it good. But I also think that just as divinity could be centered in the body of a Middle Eastern Jewish man 2,000 years ago, I would say I think creation can have that type of relationship of well. I don't want to say creation is incarnation. I'm not quite there.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something about particularity and specificity and the local that is just holier in a way that's beyond what we think it is. So,
all right. So back to the book, and we're not going to get through all the questions I had planned because so many things sparked my interest. But readers of the book will encounter the word itself quite frequently. So as an example, here's a sentence from your book. I see now that the one who is forever being and truth and goodness is also beauty itself. So what's the impulse behind this emphasis on the idea that God not only has being or is good, true, and beautiful, but is those things itself or himself?
I think the emphasis is that all of creation points to the Creator, in the sense that we see his reflection in all things. And when you start to combine those experiences together, oh, that's a beautiful mountain. Oh, that's a beautiful sunset. That's a beautiful, his eyes are beautiful. When you start to put those things together, you then say, okay, well, what does beauty mean? This word that exists in all these different contexts, what is beauty itself? And is there an itself? Is there an objective thing called beauty, or is it entirely a social construct? One of the questions I ask my students is a mountain beautiful even when no humans are there to see it? And if you say yes, then are you saying that beauty isn't just a subjective thing in our minds? There is something called beauty itself. And I think that the one who is beauty itself, the eternal, objective, transcendent reference point for beauty, is God. And I think if we say otherwise, I think we end up basically cutting our experience of the world God has made basically in half. I just can't imagine God creating us solely for the sake of being moral, so that we could sit around and say, I will not steal this. I too will not steal this. Like, I think of morality as a really, I don't think it's less than beauty, but I don't think it's more. I think we were made for beatific vision, for color, for poetry, for art, for sex, for sunsets and seas. And I think there's a reason that the beatific vision is meant to be an aesthetically and sensory experience. And because I think God is the one who is beauty itself. That doesn't mean, when I say objective beauty, I don't think that means we can rank people according to hotness the way that like Mark Zuckerberg does in The Social Network. But I do think we focus so much on human beauty, or like human beauty standards, that we've missed this broader question of cosmic beauty. And I think if most people are being honest with themselves, they would say that they experience reality as objectively more beautiful when they're surrounded by sounds, sights, colors, sensations, than when they're alone in a dull, dark room with none of those things. I think everybody experiences one of those things as objectively more beautiful than the other. And I think, minimally speaking, that's all you need to say there is one who is beauty itself.
One of the things that initially piqued my interest in the book, hearing you on your podcast, is where you talk about Moses encountering Jesus in the Transfiguration. So I don't know how much you want to get into that, but I'm just curious about what's going on with Moses encountering Jesus in the wilderness. Why would you make such a claim?
Yeah, so it's definitely not meant to be an exegetically provable claim. It's meant to be an interesting rhetorical device to end the book. But I would say that said, I think it has more oomph than it might seem, because, I mean, who does God appear to? Who sees God in the Old Testament, right? It's Moses, and we all believe that the Old Testament figures encountered Christ in some way or other, or else how are they getting to God if it's through Christ? You know what I mean? So we assume the Old Testament figures have this encounter with Jesus. We assume that Moses actually sees Jesus on a mountain or a hill, right? And in the New Testament, we see Jesus seeing Moses, right? He physically sees him.
With Elijah. Yeah.
With Elijah, yeah. And it's not just a random encounter. That's the beatific, that's the Transfiguration encounter, and I don't want to say that that's not like when he becomes divine. I don't think that, but it's definitely when his divinity is displayed and emphasized, right? And so if we're saying Moses glimpses God on a mountain, and in the New Testament, we have Moses glimpsing God on a mountain, and if we're assuming that time doesn't quite work the way that we think it does, why would those not be the same moment? And is it almost redundant to make those separate moments when we believe that for God, who is eternal, they wouldn't necessarily be separate moments? So I don't want to say that's the right interpretation, but I do think that it's a very plausible one. And I think some people would say you're importing sci-fi nonsense onto the Bible, but I would say, well, to say otherwise, you've already imported a view of time onto the Bible when you import a linear time, when you assume that those couldn't be the same moment. And there might be some things in the text itself that gesture towards them being the same moment, right? Like it's Moses on a mountain encountering and seeing God. And that happens twice in Scripture. Is that not a natural parallel? And you brought up a quote from Jude in one of our email exchanges about this.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have the memorized. What was the verse again?
So I forget the exact reference, but one of the points I was making there is that, I mean, obviously as a Trinitarian, the idea that Jesus would be involved in the Exodus period and in the wilderness is totally makes sense. But Jude actually talks about, and this is like actually a manuscript difference. So there's one manuscript tradition that has this and one that doesn't. And the one that has it is probably the more older and reliable. But it talks about how Jesus, and we know that Jesus when he brought Israel out of Egypt. And it just says it as if, obviously, Jesus brought Israel out of Egypt. And if you're reading it, you're like, well, hold on a second. No, he comes later. And Jude doesn't have a problem with that. So it places him at the Exodus. And so that collapse of time in the Transfiguration was very intriguing.
Yeah. Well, and I like how you say the collapse of time, because the Transfiguration does feel like the moment where time and eternity meet. in glorious light, right? So why wouldn't it be? And if you say, my co-host Seth said, it's either teleportation or it's time travel, because either God's teleporting Moses and Elijah out of heaven to come here, or he's going back in time and bringing the two together. Either way, it's an odd sci-fi thing. So, and I love that Jesus, if Jesus was there bringing them out of Egypt, like, why not? Let's go nuts with it. At least as an option.
And there's a part of the story there. It's very, I love how, like, what happens in the story there. And I'll let listeners read the book to find out about that, what happens in that encounter, what precedes it in particular. But one thing I want to just ask more generally about your kind of way of thinking. So paradox seems to play a pretty key role, or at least the idea that at some point we hit against these fundamental paradoxes in our philosophy and theology, whether it be the 3 in 1 or the divine sovereignty and human freedom, or time and eternity. So maybe if you could just talk about, like, when you're willing to play the paradox card and when you think it's cheating. In other words, like, when is it a shortcut for just not doing the work of thinking and saying, well, it's a mystery. We can't solve it. It's a mystery. We're like, I'm not going to worry about thinking about the Trinity. It's just a mystery, or paradox, So, yeah.
Yeah. This is hard because this is like the whole core. What I would say is that I don't go to paradox or mystery lightly. I'm trying to say I'm a deeply rational person without that sounding as like I'm very intelligent. I just mean my style. Like, my style is I hate mystery and I hate paradox. I need to figure out the answer. That was me as a kid. I need to figure out the answer. And so I don't lightly go there. I think some people go there because that's their natural predisposition. It's beyond us, and that's just not me. And what I found when I followed these mysteries is that a lot of problems, could just be solved if you thought about them enough. But that over and over again, there were some fundamental mysteries that just kept popping up in a myriad of different contexts, whether it was science, philosophy, literature. It's just those basic mysteries keep popping up. And I began to notice, or at least feel like, they were very similar mysteries over and over again. And this gets into my book, MonoThreeism, again, so I don't want to rehash all of that. But for me, once you accept the Trinity, everything else begins to make sense. If you deny the Trinity, then you might have a strict rational ontology, but then none of your experience of reality makes sense. And to make this ontological, I think every worldview has a fundamental breakdown at some point. The question is, which breakdown do you pick? If at the heart of your ontology is oneness, then this world of difference, this world of time and space where things are located in different places, where events occur at different times and distinct dates, this is an illusion. It's all swallowed up into a more fundamental oneness. And the difference between self and other, me and you, Christian and Hindu and Muslim, those are all illusions, because all things are ultimately one. All of the things that you think are distinct. And so in one sense, that's a very rational worldview, to say that it's all one. I think very rational people get there because that's kind of the most, it seems like very rational. But then you have to deny all of your experience, your phenomenological encounter with reality. But if you go the other direction and you say difference, everything is difference, everything is distinct and many, well, then you have to negate any underlying unity to things, an underlying moral meta-narrative. You definitely have to negate that there is such a thing as beauty itself or goodness itself. And also, I think that breaks down reason at some point, because reason is the attempt to say there's a unified rationality that binds together all things. If everything is distinct and different, there is no unified vision or coherent underlying interconnected reality, right? Because that's to bring oneness back into the conversation. But as a Trinitarian, I just say both of those things are equally fundamental. And my sense is that once I've said that, all of the other debates they mostly just don't even, they're still stuck in the oneness or the many language. They're not capable, anytime they find a distinction between things, they think they've broken the underlying unity that makes them cohere. But if you think difference can coexist with unity, that just, so what I would then say is, for me, a lot of people critique things because, oh, well, actually, there's some differences you haven't thought, and that negates the unity, right? Like, I think some of the classic postmodern critiques is there's a lot of differences that you're washing over here, right? So therefore, there is no meta-narrative. Well, maybe there's unity amidst diversity, right? And I think once you say that, you can allow a lot of things to coexist, paradoxically at their root, but in a way that's true to your experience of reality. And I think for me, that's where reality and phenomenology and actual experience tethers reason and metaphysics. I think if we're strictly trying to do metaphysics and try to rationally hammer out all these things, there's no absolute coherent system of reality. Everyone hits a breakdown at some point. Whether you start with oneness or manyness or both, there's a fundamental something you cannot understand and you have to deny about your experience of reality. But once you just accept that both oneness and manyness exist, my experience of reality suddenly makes a lot of sense. I see things that are disjointed and different. I see things that are unified and one. I experience time as segmenting into distinct parts. And yet I do also feel like there's some sort of eternal unity to the cosmos. And so I would say that experience is what tethers me from just embracing anything. If someone says, well, I didn't steal that guy's wallet. And then other people say, well, we have all this evidence and photos and cameras. If that guy then says, well, it's a paradox because I guess I both did and didn't steal it. He's basically, he's doing something that's not true to experience. None of us experience that sort of paradox happening. But do we experience the paradox of time and eternity coming together in poetry, worship, sex? Yeah, I think we do. You know what I mean? Do I experience goodness itself in diverse, distinct, different contexts where that person can be good and that person can be good? And it's different. Those are different people. And yet there's an underlying unity to that. Yes, I do. So I think experience in conversation with reason is what brings these things together. And I think that's mysterious, but it's also very rational. And that again points to the Trinity, because do I think Jesus is God? Do I think the Logos is God? Yes. But is the Logos all that God is? No. God's also Father. And so I think reason is absolute, but also it's not. And that's the Trinitarian tension itself. Just as there is more to God than the Logos, and yet the Logos is fully God, I think reason tells us everything, but it also points beyond itself, and in a way that's quite mysterious. So I actually think mystery and reason come together in the one God who is both at the same time. And I don't think that's all that different from what every worldview ends up saying at some point, because everyone ends up saying something ridiculous at some point. And at least our Trinitarian grammar gives us a reason for why reason still works while also not being everything. If that makes sense. So that was a lot of maneuvers I'm doing there, and I'm sure a lot of people would hate that. But
no, it's very, very helpful. I want to end by just asking, with regard to the book, Zeus Was an Atheist, what are your hopes for this book?
Wealth, fame,
yeah,
glory. No,
amen. Yeah.
I think we're both enough books. I think we're both enough books in to know that, like, hey, we might get tens of $20s of dollars from these books, right? There's no fame or glory coming. I think this might be the first book that I'm genuinely like, I wrote this for me. If you want to,
yeah,
I just had fun with it. And I think with previous books, I had these expectations, And I constantly just had those disappointed. And I think God used that process to help. I don't want to say humble me, because that's a very arrogant thing to say. But I see books, I don't want to say children, not in terms of importance, but I think there's a sense in which you create it, you do everything you can with it. And then at some point you have to say, it's not mine anymore. Go be your own thing. And you might do things in communities that matter. And I might hear about some of those things, but you're not mine anymore. And so I'm trying not to have expectations for it. But of course, do I hope that everything I do has some sort of net positive? You know what I mean? Like that I didn't use more electricity in writing the book on my laptop than I actually produce net good. Yes, I do. But I'm trying to stop expecting things from it, in the same way that I don't want to impose expectations on my kids. I just want to be their cheerleader, but also I don't own them.
Yeah.
They're not mine. They're God's.
Well, you've released this child into the world. Zeus was an atheist, and I think it will do a lot of good. So, and beyond just a sort of carbon offset, to whatever you did there.
Yes, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, thanks so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and encourage readers to go check out Zeus Was An Atheist, an odd retelling of the Moses story, published by Cascade Books in 2025. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to talk to you.
You've been listening to OnScript, delectable conversations on scripture and theology. If this episode has brought you inner peace or lit your biblical fire, please consider a small donation of just $2 or $5 per month. Information on how to donate can be found at onscript.study/donate.